Unfortunately, 49 of the top people from the Apollo program sent a letter to the NASA administrator saying, "You guys have got to stop this. We did a lot of good work for you. We gave this agency a great reputation, and you've got these people over at the Goddard Institute for Space Studies who are doing this garbage work. They're embarrassing the agency, and we're ruining our reputation." So it was a great thing for Professor Cox to do, to bring this up, because he was exactly on the wrong side of it. Okay, next one. Okay, so now the other half of that picture of Brian Cox, well, he's obviously has a lot more hair than me, so he's got one big advantage than me. But he pointed this graph from NASA showing how temperatures have been going, increasing steadily for the last 100 years or so. And this is something which I have a lot of expertise in. I've been studying the history of government temperature graphs. So the U.S. Government Climate Lab is the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado, where I live. I ride my bike up there just about every day. Great place. And in 1974, they published this graph, which showed no warming from 1870 to 1970. You can see down there at the bottom, National Center for Atmospheric Research. And what's particularly interesting about this is that there was a lot of warming to about 1940, and then a very strong cooling where essentially all of the prior warming had been lost by 1970. Okay, next please. Okay, this is a very similar graph put out by the U.S. National Academy of Sciences in 1975. You see the same pattern, a lot of warming in 1940, a lot of cooling, and temperatures in 1970 were no warmer than they were in 1880. Okay, next please. But now if we look at the current NASA graph, I just took this off the NASA website a couple of days ago. I want to make clear that I'm just talking about land temperatures in all of these graphs. This is the NASA land temperature graph. We no longer see that post-1940 cooling. It's disappeared. So we had NCAR, National Academy of Sciences, many other studies that were done 40 years ago showed cooling after 1940, but now NASA no longer shows any of this. And this is very troubling. Okay, and this one I've overlaid the National Academy of Sciences graph in black with the NASA graph in red. They're at identical scales on both axes. You can see how NASA has completely removed the post-1940 cooling. Okay, next please. All right, and this is one of my favorite ClimateGate emails from Tom Wigley to Phil Jones at CRU. It would be good to remove at least part of the 1940s blip, but we were still left with why the blip. So they made a decision. They wanted to remove this blip here, this 1940s blip, and they didn't even have any reason to do it at the time. And go back, please. And this graph was 1981, graph generated by James Hansen, and the red graph is their current NASA graph. Once again, these are the identical scale on both axes. So you can see how they've greatly cooled the past since 1981. And James Hansen was the guy who started this whole big climate scare. That was his black graph up there. So they've cooled temperatures substantially over the last 35 years. Next, please. Okay. In 1989, Tom Karl, who was the longtime head of NOAA's National Climatic Data Center in the United States, he just retired a couple weeks ago. He said that while global cooling actually warmed overall since 1881, it cooled from 1921 to 1979. And he said almost all of the warming occurred before 1919. And then there was this cooling from 1921 to 1979. Next, please. Now, on this graph, I've drawn this line here showing the current NASA 1921 to 1979. They now show about 0.6C warming during that same period when Tom Karl, who's also become a top alarmist, said that the Earth was cooling in 1989. Very troubling once again. Okay, so did this post-1940 to 1970 cooling actually occur? Well, this was an article from the New York Times in 1961. It says there was unanimous agreement among Assembly of Specialists on Climate Change from several continents that the Earth was cooling. So every single scientist who studied the problem in the 1960s believed that the Earth was cooling, and NASA no longer shows it cooling. Next, please. Okay, this was in 1970, the U.S. and Russia, this was reported in the New York Times again, were very worried about why the Arctic was getting so cold. The ice was becoming ominously thicker, and whether this was going to lead to another ice age. So clearly, the Earth was cooling at this time. Okay, this was 1979. NOAA said it was indisputable that the Earth had been cooling since World War II. Once again, all this cooling has been erased. The top guy at NOAA said that it had cooled down about 0.5 degrees Celsius, which is what was seen in the NCAR graph and the National Academy of Sciences graph. Okay, and there we go again. Where's that cooling? It's gone now. It's no longer there in the NASA graph. I mean, anyone who's not troubled by this sort of change should be. Okay, so Gavin Schmidt conveniently put a tool up on his website, on the NASA website, where we can actually see the changes that have been made in different versions of NASA graphs. So this is their 2000 version. They had about 0.5 C warming, which is represented by the red there. Okay, next please. This is the 2012 version. It's gone from 0.5 C warming up to 0.9 C warming. Next. Okay, and now they show about 1.4 C warming. So basically NASA has tripled the total amount of global warming since the year 2000. Okay, so you might ask the question, well, maybe the Earth just warmed a lot since the year 2000. And once again, okay, this line here shows what satellites show has happened over land over the last 16 years. They show the temperatures have either been flat or they've declined slightly. And at the same time, NASA temperatures, land temperatures, show a very strong warming trend. There's this huge divergence. So we keep hearing about all these record temperatures we're having. Well, they're not being measured in the troposphere, and that's where the greenhouse effect occurs, is in the troposphere, right? So I don't know, NASA's taking temperatures in parking lots or what, but this warming is not occurring in the troposphere that NASA's reporting. And if it's not occurring in the troposphere, it's not global warming, because that's what global warming theory depends on, is that tropospheric warming, not parking lot warming. Okay, my specialty, what I've really focused on mostly has been the U.S. temperature record. The U.S. has the best and most contiguous, most complete temperature record in the world. It's all available on the NOAA website. The blue line shows what their actual measured temperature date is. And as you can see, temperatures in the United States have actually cooled some over the last 80 to 90 years. But the red line is what they publish in their graphs. They show this strong warming trend during that time. The entire reason why why NOAA shows a U.S. warming trend is because they've altered the data. And, you know, they don't dispute that they do this. But what they don't do is, you know, they put out a graph of U.S. temperatures. What they don't do is they don't put a disclaimer on it saying, this data has been altered. The actual data says that we're cooling. Right? So they've got a small group of people, just, you know, a handful of people who have made this unilateral decision. We're going to ignore the actual data which shows the U.S. cooling. We're going to turn it into a warming trend. And this is just not how we do science. And it's very deceptive. You know, they should at least, if they're going to do this, publish the raw temperature graph too, but they never do. You'll never see a raw temperature graph from NOAA. They're hiding this information from the American people. They're hiding it from our policymakers. And policy is being made based on data which is very, very dodgy, and data techniques that are very dodgy. So it's quite upsetting to me. Okay, so this, once again, going back to Tom Carl, who was head of the NCDC until a few weeks ago in 1989. This is an article from the New York Times. U.S. data since 1895 failed to show warming trend. Scientists from NOAA said that there was said that there's no significant change in the average temperature or rainfall in the United States over the past century, which means no climate change, right? So NOAA was saying not that long ago there was no climate change in the United States, and now they show a lot of climate change during that period. Next. Okay, and this one I threw in, it's not just temperature data that's being altered. Okay, this is sea level data here. You see the NASA 1982 line? Once again, that was James Hansen, the world's top climate alarmist. He showed that sea level rise, this is global sea level rise, almost stopped after the year 1955. This blue line here is the current NASA CSIRO graph. NASA is now taking their data from CSIRO. And instead of showing sea level slowing down to almost nothing, they show it accelerating now. And the 1982 James Hansen graph showed 1 centimeter of sea level rise from 1955 to 1980. And now they're showing 5 centimeters of sea level rise. Sea level rise is not that hard a thing to measure. But what they've done is what the CSIRO guys and NASA guys have done. They've started cherry picking stations that are land that's subsiding. So the land's going down, and yeah, it looks like sea level's going up. And NOAA, interestingly enough, shows much slower rates. And they don't, if you look at the NOAA graphs, NOAA has a very complete set of sea level graphs. I don't think you can find one single station which shows that sort of pattern in there. Okay, so this one here, I just want to digress a little, because this is going back to an article from the Maitland Mercury from 1846, where the Aborigines were talking about huge amounts of climate change in Australia and blaming it on other people for it. Okay, next. Okay, this is another one of my favorite articles from the U.S. Monthly Weather Review from 1907. It says the misuse of meteorological data is a crime against the community, and it's up to the independent press, bloggers, I guess, to repress all climate cheats and hoaxes. And I've sort of seen that as been my role here. Okay, so in summary of the first part here, Brian Cox held up a graph which has been massively altered. The people at NASA who generated the graph had nothing to do with the moon landings. The people who did go to the moon agree with Senator Roberts, not with Brian Cox. I'd say Brian Cox made a very clumsy appeal to authority and apparently did no research to back it up. And history is not on the side of climate alarmists. Okay, next. Okay, so who are these experts we've been listening to about climate? Okay, Paul Ehrlich in 1997 came to us. He's an American from California, from Stanford University. He came to Australia and attacked the Howard government over their stance on climate change. Of course, it was widely reported all over about how evil the Australians were because they weren't going to take care of climate change for the future. Okay, and the same guy, Paul Ehrlich, in 1970, he said that the oceans would be dead and America would run out of food and water by 1980. The guy's kind of a whack job, but he got published in all the Australian papers as attacking the Howard government over this. Next. Okay, but this guy gets worse. In 1969, he was published in the New York Times as promoting poisoning people in Africa in order to keep the population down. And then in 1990, he also said he not only wanted to kill off the poor people, he also wanted to kill off the rich people too. And this guy was quoted as being a climate expert in 1997. Okay, James Hansen, the world's #1 climate alarmist, he predicted in 1988 that lower Manhattan would be underwater sometime between the years 2008 and 2018. He said the West Side Highway will be underwater, there'll be tape across the windows, the birds will all be gone. I was in Manhattan recently. I didn't notice any of those things, but might have been mistaken. And this is the actual NOAA tide gauge data from Manhattan for the last 20 years. You notice there's been no net change in sea level in Manhattan for 20 years now. So it's not only not underwater, but nothing has changed. Yeah, this is James Hansen, the most respected climate alarmist in the world. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Okay, this is a